Good morning. Welcome to another session, another week of hashtag LDeduchat, leadership development in education online. We have an absolutely outstanding lineup for you this week. We've got Penny, who'll be looking at doing leadership differently. Tomorrow we've got John Rees, who'll be looking at how we look at PSHE, as in personal, social, health, education, in line with improving schools. And then on Wednesday, we have Chris Nichols, who'll be looking at coaching and how we can implement effective coaching within our schools for better outcomes for our staff and our students. And then finally on Friday, we have Mark Mailer and Daniel Connor from Chiltern High School for Boys, who'll be looking at how they embedded a reading culture within a school of boys, and no mean feat at all. A brilliant way to end the week. And I just want to just really highlight to you that today is quite a monumental day in some ways. We've got the next phase of our schools reopening, so I do really appreciate my colleagues that are online joining us this morning. Year 10s and year 12s across England in some form will be re-entering schools over the coming weeks. And also we've got some partial lifting off the lockdown, so we've got some of our non-essential shops opening up. But in terms of monumental weeks, we have Penny this morning. There's so much that Penny does, and if you follow Penny on Twitter or on LinkedIn or anything that she does, you'll know what a contribution she makes to our whole education landscape. I've been following her for the last few years, and I never thought I'd be in a position where I'd be sitting here talking to her online during a lockdown, conducting a live webinar. Make those connections, make those changes. You never know what the future holds. Really looking forward to today's session. It's going to be an exceptional session, and please do engage. Use our Twitter handle at Chiltern TSA, where we've got Sufyan Sadiq, who will be conducting the chat online there. So without further ado, we are now going to jump straight into Penny's presentation, and I shall see you after the video.
Hi there, my name's Penny Rabiger, and I'm going to be talking to you today about leadership and doing it differently. So I am the co-founder of the Bane Network. I'm a chair of governors, a MAT trustee, director of engagement at Lifter, a fellow of the Chiltern College of Teaching, and I blog at 10 pence more. And throughout this session, I'm going to be asking you some questions, and you might want to grab a pen and paper and just to jot down some notes when I do. So I'm going to set out some of the learning and developing thoughts I have on leadership and on the concept of doing it differently based on several years of leadership and many years of feeling different and differentiated. And I'll thank the inimitable Calvin and Hobbes in advance for supporting me over the next 30 minutes with these cartoons, which I hope will go a little way to illustrate some of the things that I'm talking about. Doing things differently isn't often a choice we make. Quite often it's a gradual realization or a sudden change of circumstances that makes us feel that we are different, and therefore we're going to have to do things differently. Our narrative is important, and it can help shift the feeling of difference from a deficit model to something that includes our own values, needs, and our moral purpose. So it's also important that this narrative includes a contextual, social, historical, and political understanding, so you can zoom in and zoom out of your personal experience within the context of the world we live in now, within the context of where you are now and the continuum of where you've come from and where you're going. So take a little moment to write down, how does your difference manifest itself? What is the historical and political context in which we operate now? Have a little jot down. Knowing your narrative in context, it's really important to engage with and to understand the societal and structural factors that impact on our being successful leaders, and that includes factors that impact on the people we lead. Women Ed has been set up to address some of the structural challenges that hold women back The notion of 10% braver, which is one of the straplines of the Women Ed movement, it could be problematic if it assumes that what is missing is women's bravery and that it's all about us lacking in confidence. But perhaps it's saying that despite all we know about how the odds are stacked against women, in a world that's conditioned to see leaders as white, middle class and male predominantly, we need to gird our loins and go forth anyway as women. Angela Brown's chapter in the Women Ed 10% Braver book sets out how bias and discrimination hold women back. The Bane Ed network is about addressing the issues around race, structural racism, and the bias that holds back men and women of colour from progressing within the profession. Being a black woman, for example, means an intersectional double whammy of disadvantage and an exhausting struggle in a predominantly white male system. So no matter how many women predominantly make up a primary school, for example, the system itself has a white male systemic bias. If you need to be 10% braver as a white woman, how much braver do you need to be as a woman or a man from a black, Asian or minority ethnic background, somebody who is minoritized? We mustn't lose sight of this in Women Ed, otherwise we feel we will just become a white feminist first movement. As a woman myself racialized as white, I know that I have enormous privilege and that I have a responsibility to ensure that I can act as a reliable ally. And this means recognizing my own privilege, taking the time to listen to my colleagues from BAME backgrounds, and to do the work myself to learn about structural racism and to do everything I can to be actively resisting this. I need to understand that I've been socialized into a society which sees women and sees people of color as inferior. No amount of pure thinking and pretending I don't see difference is going to change this. As a leader, your personal narrative is important, but you need to know your context beyond your own personal story. You need to know how your own personal story fits into the societal and political context of our times. And you need to contextualize your and other people's narratives within this. And that's difficult, but it's vital if you do want to lead differently. And I guess here is a good point to pause and think about, what is your personal narrative and how does that intersect with the historical and political context that we were looking at just before. If understanding others' narrative is essential to leadership, we need to be aware that we all too often try to lead people, especially if we're doing it differently, knowing that they may not like what we have to say, or worse, we're surprised when people raise objections to what we want to say. And too many people try to ram through decisions anyway, or blame those above them or the system when delivering messages that others might find difficult to hear. People who've worked with me will know that I absolutely believe in something called objection handling as an essential component to the leadership toolkit. I'll explain what I mean. So, those people in the leadership team who say, oh, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, or worse, fixate on a particular issue, making your strategy, your idea or suggestion just seem unworkable. And how many times did you see that coming and just hope they would be ill or inexplicably mute on the day? It's foolish not to do the work ahead of time and to do some objection handling. So imagine that person who likes to put a stick in your spokes and think, what would they say at this point? Force yourself to think about the questions you least want to be asked and have answers to them. Address them head on, name them and pick them off one by one in your initial presentation of the proposal. Use research, clear rationale, previous experience to back up your handling of possible objections that you think will be on other people's minds. This is not a tool to help you get your way more often. It helps you to see, hear, and appreciate the diversity of thought and opinion within your team, and to take a small piece of this into your own practice rather than resenting people who have different opinions and worldviews to you. It actually makes decision making faster and easier because you've done the work ahead of time to think up all of the reasons why your plan may be less easily accepted by others. It helps your colleagues trust you and know they are heard, seen and felt. It actively promotes including diversity of thought into your own leadership practice rather than simply making sure you have a top trumps team of diverse people sitting in front of you that are not actually being included at all. As a school leader, don't forget to extend this to beyond the leadership team. So do you know what your teachers, your teaching assistants, the catering staff think? Do you know what students think, their families, local businesses and the wider community? When you're putting together a policy or you're communicating, have you held those people in your mind and done the objection handling work that you need to do? And what would Beyonce do? And who are your Beyoncés? Have a little think. Who are the people that you need to take into account what they're going to say ahead of time? Who are the other voices that you should be including when you're communicating decisions or changing policy or doing anything? Who are those people that you should be including and you don't yet? To succeed as a leader, you need to know what your strengths are. You need to see the strengths of those around you as complementary and not threats to your authority. Good leaders have the confidence and the wisdom to surround themselves with people that are far better than them at a myriad of things. They build the right team and they draw on others' expertise without feeling this threatens their ability to lead. Quite the opposite. If you have the right people rowing the boat, you can concentrate on navigating the choppy waters using your skills and expertise properly deployed. Now, StrengthsFinder is an excellent tool to do this. Use it across the organisation and it shows a commitment to find the leading strengths in each person, and it gives you the opportunity for dialogue around and deployment of those strengths. Things that you thought were quirky personality traits might be revealed to you and others as your unique and essential leadership qualities. For example, I'm a person collector and a people connector. This has been integral to my leadership since StrengthsFinder made me realize that this is a hugely valued and massively enjoyable strength I have. It's not just some quirky thing. When you're under threat or being made to feel inadequate, revisiting your StrengthsFinder profile can be really affirming. It's something that should be revisited regularly, as you'll see that you tend to take things for granted and even leave some strengths behind rather than developing them. And your identified strengths should be developed. We spend too much time trying to get better at things that we hate and we're crap at in the name of being leaders. Much of what we do with performance management is ridiculously wed to this. It's nonsense. As long as you know where there are gaps and where you have support, you'll be fine. You do need some basic competencies, a range of things, and you shouldn't be building dependencies where they're irreplaceable. And I'll say more about institutional knowledge in this context next, but think about this. What are you crap at? And what are your superpowers? I bet you'll know really easily what you're crap at and find it much harder to identify the things that you just know you rock at. Write them down. So when building your dream team of people cleverer than you at a myriad of things and whose strengths you know clearly about, be careful not to build a wobbly Jenga tower. They say the mark of a good leader is when everything runs smoothly when they're there and when they're not. However, it's easy to rely on capable people too much, and you can come unstuck when you take your eye off the ball and lose any link to the detail, or when that person leaves and they take valuable institutional knowledge with them. In organisations I've led in, it's been really important to ensure that knowledge, where possible, is institutional knowledge and that our systems and processes capture essential information. This means that if the worst happens and someone leaves, they aren't going to leave you high and dry and unable to function. So this can be as simple as knowing the code to the science cupboard so that when the science teacher is suddenly taken ill, you can get in and support the practicals that students need to do that day. But it also means capturing the way we do things. So that can be used effectively to empower new starters in their induction period, and so it can be co-created, reviewed and embedded into everyone's practice so that you feel certain that everyone's rowing in the same direction and that everyone understands the values and moral compass that steers the ship and keeps a happy crew. Values are much, much more than a poster on a wall, and they're much, much more than a staff handbook. So if everyone is involved in co-creating institutional knowledge, that's really powerful. Working in my role, which requires a lot of relationship management, I know I'm not losing anything if I leave clear and useful records of contacts, interactions, and next steps for the organisation. I can also take away with me my professional relationships without taking anything away from the organisation. So don't confuse this with not allowing people to have the rights to their lesson plans or to anything that they've created for the organisation. But I know that I can be clear in my knowledge that I'm doing both parties a favour by ensuring that the good work I do doesn't collapse because I'm leaving. And those good relationships between the organisation and other organisations that I have forged don't collapse either just because I'm not there. And both sides will remember me kindly for this. So it's win-win all round. So think about it. In your organisation, who holds institutional power? What are you going to do about it? How do you capture institutional knowledge and make it powerful and useful for all? So again, anyone who knows me knows that I believe in being outward facing. Part of the call to action around engaging with the social, political and cultural experiences of yourself and others can also be answered by being outward facing. And schools are insular places. Many teachers don't engage with what's going on outside their own classroom, let alone collaborate across departments, local schools, nationally or internationally. Social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, they're an excellent way to broaden your personal learning network. They're not the only way, but they are an excellent way. And they can highlight things that you need to read, think about, do differently as leaders. But I challenge you to engage with people who don't look, sound, or express views that are like your own, as well as with the usual mirror-tocracy of connections. It's important. It could be the start of a way to change your world and also to change the world in general. If you do an audit of your Twitter connections, your professional connections on LinkedIn, does everyone look like you or could belong to your family? Do something about it. Broaden your network. Every leader, whether you're a classroom teacher leading learning for 5-year-olds or a multi-academy trust CEO, should have a mentor or a coach or somebody that puts them through their paces. This should be someone neutral and you should consider paying for them. I know there are quite a few free programs and that's excellent, but if you pay for them as you would a therapist or someone who does your eyebrows, you'll value them. Every leader should be sending the elevator back down and lifting others in their networks. So remember that you learn as much through supporting someone else as you do through gaining support from others. So make time for it. Going to events is a really good idea. And a lot of people get anxious about this because they don't want to leave things behind at school, or they don't want to be seen to be not pulling their weight. But if you get business cards made, set yourself goals for events you attend, you'll see that you have really reaped rewards from them. Before you go, scour the list of event speakers, and each session you attend, hang about at the end and give them some feedback on their talk and exchange contact details. Reach out to attendees ahead of time to arrange to meet for a chat in one of the breaks. Be proactive. People are friendly and they want to connect. And Twitter celebrities are a figment of everyone's imagination, so don't be intimidated. Be clear on what you have to give and what you'd like to gain from connections. Follow up after you've met with a clear action if you can genuinely think of one. So have a think. Who is in your network? And what are your networks? Are there gaps? Are there places that you think you need to be going or stretching yourself? Do an audit on your followers and who you're following. Knowing your shelf life. Now, this is an interesting one. It took me a long time and several jobs to realize this. Prior to that, I'd never been one to leave a job or even leave a lover. I have resilience. I've developed it from childhood. Resilience can be like Teflon to abuse and neglect. And that's not a good type of resilience that does anyone any good. That means it never really occurred to me that if things weren't working out, I should actually get up and go. It felt like failure to me. If I just tried harder, worked smarter, was good and likable, it would all pan out, right? And gosh, when things were good, why would you ever consider leaving? This is what I've learned, and it's incredibly empowering. I now know that my work with any organization has a shelf life. I know that I can lead well for a specific leg of the journey we need to go on. I work with organizations on their journey from startup to grown up, and I now know exactly the point where I can enter and add value, where I need to bring on team members and work with them to build capacity, co-create institutional knowledge, expertise, sustainability, and I'm starting to know where I need to get the hell out of the way. Rather than living in fear of being found out, or worse, being driven out or getting bored, I can have a frank conversation with any organisation I work with about my shelf life, what they would like to get from me, and how and when we should start speaking about the journey towards exit. And working with younger people, it's really obvious to them that 2 or 3 years is ample time in one role, and that they'll be looking for a change of role or change of scene within that time period. As a leader, you need to know your shelf life and those of the people you lead, and prepare for it accordingly. Too many leaders hang on forever, long past anything that's dignified. And too many leaders are really offended when people move on to pastures new. So think about shelf life when you're thinking about your people. A good leader leaves at the right time with a bounce in their step and leaving empowered team members ready to keep pushing forwards. A happy employee leaves feeling empowered for the next step in their journey and taking a small piece of the great culture, the values, the systems and processes that you established into their next role. Think of it like a small piece of your leadership DNA infecting for good and making a dent on the universe by proxy. So have a think. What's your shelf life as a leader? And what are you going to do about it? Jot that down. Now, I hope this has given you food for thought. There's some references here for follow-up. So some of the things that I've mentioned, you can read about a bit more in some of my blog posts on 10 pence more. The Strengths Finder tool is not expensive and a fantastic way to start exploring your own strengths, and you can implement some brilliant tools across your organisation. And then there's the Bane Network, LGBT Ed and Women Ed, which might be useful to you as well. I was involved in my shelf life before I agreed to speak here, so my time is up speaking to you. I will be able to hang around for some questions, and I look forward to connecting with you and learning more about your leadership journey. So it's goodbye from me now, and goodbye from Calvin.
Welcome back, and thank you to Calvin making a guest appearance there. I'd like to welcome Penny Rabiger, who, as I said, I've looked up to, and she knows that, for many a year. And the most powerful thing that I think from my personal point of view in this part of the journey that I've had is actually the point about being deliberate in building your networks. And that isn't being mercenary, that isn't being manipulative in any way, but you need to know yourself and what you want to achieve and connect with the people that are going to help you achieve that. And as a return from that, you end up helping other people doing the same too. So from me, my point of view, my journey the last 2 years, building a network in an area that I've never lived in from a work perspective before, hooking up with people like Penny and the network that she has been absolutely invaluable. And I can't stress that enough, is that do connect with the people that you align with, and sometimes the people that challenge you too. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the E stage Penny Rabiger.
Hi there. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
She messaged me saying that she's stunned you into silence regarding questions, and I had to remind her that she was telling you all the way through that presentation. Make a note of this and write about this and have a think about this. And I know that you will have been actively engaged in what Penny was saying rather than thinking what you necessarily wanted to ask. So I just want to give you some time just to really pose the questions that you want to do. But I know there's some questions that had come up that Penny has highlighted that she wants to start with. So where do you want to start with, Penny?
So great. So I'll start with how should you lead and manage difficult conversations effectively in your department when those in question are also SLT or previous heads of department. And I thought that's an interesting one, because if we reflect back to thinking about other people's skills and what they bring to the table and trying not to see those as threats, that's probably a classic example where people kind of pull hierarchy and say, well, when I ran the department, or things like that. So I think the best way would be to start by finding out what's important to them, to understand their strengths and their context in their own words. So do some finding out. I think objection handling here is a really good exercise. So write down all of the things that you think they're going to be saying, all the kind of, yeah, but what about this, that, and the other, and then ask them and see, do your thoughts match what they actually say? Because you might be piling on a bit more paranoia or fear, or maybe you're spot on and they really are resisting what you're planning to do. And then, of course, model being a listener and being open. You don't have to answer all of their questions or concerns on the spot. You can take them away and reflect and say, thanks, that's really helpful. So I think be consultative is my advice.
Definitely. Some questions have started to come through now.
Another question that came through was from Marion Porter, who was asking about thoughts on leadership succession planning. And there's some really good models in schools. I visited a school not so long ago where all the deputy heads were called head teachers in training. Which I thought was a really nice way to remind deputies that they are going to step up to headship. You can't be a deputy for the rest of your life. So I think succession plan is really important, and I think that also goes with the kind of institutional knowledge as being powerful knowledge, and it goes together with the shelf life. So having those conversations with people, and I would also say ask people where they see themselves and why, because we tend to, especially in the school sector, we tend to kind of run on train tracks on quite a linear path, and there's no shame in wanting to become somebody who's an absolute expert in their field, rather than stepping out of the classroom and becoming a manager, for example, where you feel you're losing that hands-on experience. So I think succession planning is really useful, and it's useful to have that with a conversation about somebody's context, their needs, where they want to go, and where they might feel they're being pushed but they're not interested in going there.
And I think it's all about the open conversations and knowing your teams and working up and down the line management structure as well, as having those conversations. Sort of linking in with that, I think it's Maisie. I don't know whether you want to have a look. What advice would you give a Bane member of your team who wants to progress but lacks some confidence?
Well, anyone who's lacking in confidence, that's a good thing for them to be able to say, and a good thing to have that conversation. So a Bane member of staff, I would do two things. One, I would ensure that my school is aware of the issues that different groups, marginalized people face. So we touched on women, we touched on people from BAME backgrounds. There's lots of things within a school culture that can seek to undermine people that we feel don't fit our kind of preconceived models. So I would first of all make sure that there's nothing in the school that is making that person feel that they are less than adequate. And then, there's coaching. Often it's just taking an interest in having a conversation with people and making them feel seen and heard, that can help. I would ask that person what support would they like to see in place, and make sure that they've got that in place, and give them chances to do things in safe ways that they don't feel undue scrutiny or set up to fail as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and quite often, especially when we're coming from a Bane background, the whole adage of the imposter syndrome, which again comes from what you just said, which is like either people explicitly or not making you feel that you're not good enough to do that role. And sometimes a lot of it's coming from within, to be fair. Quite often is that you don't feel, because you've had a lifetime of being made to feel not good enough, that that has a severe impact on confidence too. Where do you want to jump to next?
Now the questions are coming in thick and fast, and I can't keep up.
I did tell you.
There's an interesting one about when's the right time to talk about shelf life, close to expiry or upfront. Yeah, that is an interesting one. And I think if you do it close to expiry, it's often that's your kind of you making your move and announcing that you're going. It can, as a line manager, that can often feel like an ultimatum or a threat from the person talking about it, unless you're sort of in with the whole question of shelf life. It's often an invitation actually to talk about how you're going to make that person stay. Up front, so I've done that up front, but that can be a bit jarring because people might think you're not in for the long run and you're just going to skip off when things get hard. So I don't think there's a hard and fast answer about it, but I definitely would avoid mentioning it on your first day. And I would, but it might be something to talk about during an interview, and it might be something to talk about in a non-threatening way when you're starting to feel itchy and that you need to move on. A lot of schools also, you know, you want to progress. There isn't that role within the school. A lot of schools will be very supportive of you to help you find that right role somewhere else. So
yeah, I mean, having that conversation, I remember my first head, he actually coached me through interview techniques for a middle management role, and I was leaving him, but he wanted to make sure that I made the best of the opportunities. And I think that's a sign of somebody who does lead. Thank you for joining us. And what's your question?
My question was to do with my so current department. I'm in a very small department at the moment with an NQT +1, and I gave that person baby, like in terms of baby steps, I gave them responsibility a little bit at a time, because they're at a point in their career where they're lacking motivation, but they can really do with that extra responsibility to show off what their potential is. However, when I do give that person extra responsibility, I feel like I'm spoon feeding sometimes what is required of them. But then after that, I also feel as if I'm chasing them for the outcome. So I'll give you a little bit of an example. So we were doing like a national curriculum audit compared to our science curriculum at the moment. And it just required them to just think a little bit deeper. But when I gave them that extra responsibility, it felt like I was chasing them for the outcome, which I wasn't really intending to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's interesting. What I hear here, correctly or incorrectly, you can tell me, through the words I gave them, to me that's somebody being given a task to complete that they may not fully have engaged with themselves or feel that their heart is in. And I think in order to avoid chasing people and avoid giving somebody something that they don't really understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how it should be done, you might want to think about having the conversation differently, which is, I've been thinking a lot about doing a review of X. Is this something that you're interested in? Yes, no. You know, hopefully they'll say, yeah, tell me more. So it's having the conversation about what is the thing, without saying, here's what I want you to do. Here's how I want you to do it. So what's the thing? Does it interest you? Okay. And what do you think might be a good route to doing that? Okay, great. How would you set that out? I often get people I give them time. So I say, look, we really need to do a review of this thing. Is that something that you could be interesting? That person will say, yeah, but I'm not quite sure if I could do it. Okay, go away, have a think. Why don't you write out a kind of timeline of what that might look like, starting with finishing the thing and working backwards. So you get them to take full ownership of what this hypothetical task would look like for anyone who's undertaking it. And that helps them slowly to come to terms with the fact that it might be them who's doing those things. You have another conversation looking at that timeline and you say, so what do you need? Are there tools? Is there funding? Is there time that you need to do this thing? And then I would set out to them what's the first milestone that you're going to reach and what you're going to do when you reach that. And that's usually, I will have written a skeleton plan by Tuesday next week, and I will book in your calendar an hour to come and talk to you about it. You don't need to chase them then. They manage the process. One of the things I do with direct reports, for example, around performance management, is that they manage the process of performance management. They put in our diaries when we're having their performance review. They put in our diaries when we have one-to-ones, and they send round the agenda for the one-to-one. So they don't rock up passive to those sessions, and they give me stuff to do ahead of time. So when we meet in our one-to-one, I want you to be thinking about this, or I want you to read this document that I prepared. So I think it's about giving that person the responsibility to visualize what does it look like, how should it be measured, what does good look like, what are the milestones, what's the timeline, what do I need? And then they are literally just saying, you know, oh, I got a bit stuck on this, can you help me here? Or here, I finished this, please read it ahead of our meeting, and so on. They manage the process.
Perfect. I mean, yeah, great advice there, Penny. And it's all about how do you get people to take ownership of what you actually want them to do for you, for themselves. Actually, it's actually good for that person to develop something that they're perhaps not aware of, or not, haven't got a skill set in. It's actually good development, but they may not see that at the time.
Well, I think also it links in, Taryn Coley asked, is it correct that leaders should not do micromanagement? And I think that's an example of how we can micromanage. So we treat our direct reports a little bit how we treat children, which is, you know, here's your homework, go and do it. If you get stuck, look on this website, come back, hand it in, done. And then they don't do it and we go, what happened? So I think if you follow those routes with people and you try and draw out of people the answers and how they're going to do something and what their barriers are, you're going to not be micromanaging them. And I think it also links to succession planning. You're modeling with that person what leadership looks like, and the first leadership they should do is leadership of themselves.
Anything else you want to jump to, Penny? There's quite a lot coming through.
Here's a nice one. Rachel Pennock says, is there a specific website you would recommend for completing an analysis of personal strengths? There are quite a few, and I had a good sort of debate with my partner who's also using StrengthsFinder with his students at university level. He's found something different, but I really swear by something that's called StrengthsFinder 2.0. It's developed by Gallup, who do a lot of the kind of opinion polls, and they are sort of experts in people. You buy it online. It costs about £15. It comes as a book, and in the back of the book there's a code that you can use to do the StrengthsFinder test, and then it gives you, why I like it, it gives you a profile, it gives you an action plan, it explains really clearly. So I don't like a lot of the kind of personality tests or the professional styles tests, because it feels a bit more like a horoscope than it does something useful. This gives you examples. So it says, you know, you're the sort of person who would find this really interesting and this not very interesting at all. And there are also tools on there. Once you've done the StrengthsFinder profile, you get opened up to a whole load of tools, for example, mapping your whole team. So when I worked at Challenge Partners, the whole team did StrengthsFinder. We mapped on a massive grid who has which strengths. We saw what strengths were missing, but we also saw which people should work in teams on different types of work. And that helped us with recruitment to think about what are we missing, where are we bunching and tending to have the same kinds of thought, you know. And you do need, with your diversity, you need not only visible diversity and diversity of background, you also need people who can think in different ways, and their different experiences have led them to tackle things in different ways, and they bring different strengths. So that's one that I would recommend, StrengthsFinder 2.0.
I'm going to paraphrase one of the questions for you, one of the long ones. So Catherine, and it kind of links to Shelflife again. I think that's really hit a chord, actually, what you've said about being in the right place at the right time for the right amount of time in terms of length of time. just to paraphrase what she said, is that she's actually been in a school for a while, and she's actually doing her journey within the school, and been fortunate, or by choice, I don't know, been able to have some of her journey within the school in terms of how she's progressed, and she's helped build the drama department from scratch, and she's currently doing an MPQML, and with the view of becoming a head of department. She said, is it silly to stay in the same place for so long, or should I stick around until I'm proud to leave a legacy of having built a department? So it's that thing, isn't it? It's where you think, I've started something, I've got to finish it, otherwise, what have I actually achieved? I think that's the achievement factor. And I think it's going to link to something else that I just saw online, which is like, does everything have a shelf life that you do? So perhaps you want to meld those couple of things in together.
Yeah, so there's an interesting concept around products that have a shelf life, and how there's built-in obsolescence. So there's a lovely documentary about a light bulb that's been on in a New York fire station for forever, and how now we make light bulbs that have built-in obsolescence, they break. So I think the question around shelf life is a really personal one, and I think there's something wonderful about working your way up through a school, building something, really getting your teeth into something, and not being distracted by having to move, start again, prove yourself over again. And I think sometimes people do jump around quite quickly. It's one of the criticisms of millennials, they kind of job hop and place hop, and then say they've got millions of years of experience when they've been 5 minutes. But anyway, I sound like an old fart here. But I think building your credibility and building your skill set within a school is absolutely fine, as long as you're doing that because you're relishing it, you love it. You should not do that if you're frightened, or you can't see a way out, or you just can't imagine yourself anywhere else. And I think it's really healthy to keep your eye on other jobs out there, but also other organisations that you'd love to work for. So I often have my eye on organisations that say, if a job comes up in the next 3, 5, 10 years at that organisation, I've been watching them, I would love to be part of them. So it's not just about your own linear journey, it's also about the skills and values and the places that you'd like to work. But yeah, I think stick at it. Sounds like you're doing an amazing thing.
Yeah, I think it's always that balance between personal achievement and professional achievement. I think that's always something that we wrestle with as teachers. Leaving the coalface of the classroom is normally the first thing that calls into question why I'm in education. I should be teaching children, and then moving further away from it. Yeah. So I think building relationships within an established, I think that there's definitely huge merits in that. It just depends on whether you're getting that personal fulfillment. Yeah. And if you are, then it ticks your boxes, I suppose. Jump to Sophie, shall we? Sophie, she says that we don't currently have many people in the faculty currently who openly disagree during meetings. Mm-hmm. How do you encourage helpful discussions, I'll add the word constructive in there, on ideas, rather than there being no questions and people are unsure or unclear about what to do or fully disregard?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It is a tricky one. I think it's probably about modelling how to disagree, or how to raise things that maybe need a further look. It's about culture as well. I love being on teams where there's robust discussion, but I also really value being able to discuss something, maybe continue to disagree, but put it to bed. And I'll be the first person to, if we've really explored something and it goes ahead even though I think it's the wrong thing to do, that's the last you'll hear from me. I won't be doing the kind of I told you so if it doesn't work out, or well, I said this wasn't a good idea. I will get behind that as well. So I think you need somebody who can model that, and maybe even think about some training on how to disagree. There's actually a really good book called How to Disagree, which is by Adam Ferner and Darren Chetty, and it's called Negotiate Difference in a Divided World. And that might be a good one for bringing for a kind of SLT book club, and to try some of the exercises in there, because I think if you can't disagree, then you're not going to be saying the whole truth ever.
I mean, and then there is the old thing about, and it's a little bit dangerous where you can play devil's advocate. It's not always recommended unless you're extremely confident in terms of what you know the outcome's going to be. But if you're if you really can't ignite a conversation, is to actually, in a professional way.
Well, you could also use objection handling techniques. So you could neutralize it from being your own view and to say, here's something we're bringing for discussion. Why don't we do an exercise where we map all of the reasons why this might not be a good idea? And then anyone can just brainstorm and throw in ideas, and you can say, why don't we embody parents in this? And let's try and pretend to be the students and how they might disagree with this or object. So you could do a kind of more of a role play where people can seed in their actual feelings, but they can be masked behind a kind of hypothetical. That might be a good way to do it.
Right down at the bottom of the list, we've got Kerry. And I think this is always a fear, especially with people that are going into leadership, I think, where you feel that you want to be developing your staff and upskilling them in some way. And by doing that, you're delegating and you're, but there's the fear that you might be seen as lazy, over delegating, perhaps even competent at your own job. That's why you're getting other people to do it. So all of those, and it feeds into that narrative to do, especially if you're Bane, that you're the imposter syndrome, that, you know, this person really good at coordinating other people doing the work, but can that person actually do it themselves?
Yeah.
So how do you build on that? And how do you avoid that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really relates also again to the very hierarchical nature of schools and the kind of culture of delegating and giving people tasks to do. And I think that does sometimes feel uncomfortable, like, oh, here's the thing that I really don't want to do. So I think if you can start with StrengthsFinder, if you can start with mapping out what people's strengths are, if your performance management isn't about micromanagement and about managing people's performance, but is more about developing people in a direction that really makes their heart sing, that they wake up in the morning and come to work going, yes, today my unique skills and talents and interests will be used, rather than, oh, here's crappy job, can you do that? I think also seeing things as rather than seeing them as tasks for people to do, to think about them in a kind of continuum of what are we trying to achieve as an organization, and asking people if they'd like to lead on something rather than if they'd like to complete a task. And I think the best line managers are people who are actively unleashing the greatness of their direct reports. They're people who know them well and who rock up and say, I've got this thing, it's so exciting, you're just going to die, you'll love it. You know, so making sure that it is something. And if it's something crap that nobody wants to do and everybody hates, then think about a way of sort of saying that and saying, there's this awful thing. Anybody want to take on an awful thing?
So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, honesty it always works.
Yeah.
In terms of
and again about don't see them as tasks, but see them as things that need to be developed, but also when you're checking in, that it doesn't feel like you're checking on somebody's, you know, you're not micromanaging them. How are you going with that? You know, how is it feeling for you?
Anything else that's jumped out at you, Penny?
Someone's just asked StrengthsFinder by who. It's called StrengthsFinder 2.0, and it's by a company called Gallup. And if you look on, I hate to say it, but if you look on, it's by Tom Rath. I was going to say if you look on Amazon, but don't look on Amazon. Don't use Amazon. Buy it somewhere else.
I know there's a variety of questions, but I just wanted to ask you, in your presentation, you said, you know, sometimes doing things differently isn't always a choice.
Yeah.
So obviously we're in this situation at the moment where we're trying to find our way forward during uncertain times, and nobody really has the answers, and quite often you can see a light at the tunnel at the moment. I think people find it quite difficult, even as leaders, especially leaders, getting guidance left, right and centre in the middle of the night from DFE, etc., etc. What would be the key things that you would advise people in those leadership roles moving forward in the phases that we've got coming up, in terms of, you are being led and forced to do things differently? How do they navigate that?
How do you navigate doing things differently when it's, I think part of it is being honest that you're going to have to take a route, and it's going to be a route, and it may not necessarily be the best route, but standing still isn't an option. So just be honest about that. Deploy your people. So do listen to what people think. Think about what their objections are to what you're about to do. Also find the answers within the people. It's a tricky one to do because you don't want to look like you're clueless and going, well, I don't know, does anyone else know? But there's a lot to be said for just gathering everybody together and harnessing some good ideas that often come from the shop floor. They come from people who are really on the front lines. I think as leaders, we often tend to try and look from above and forget what does that feel like for the people delivering that to the young people in the classrooms or remotely or whatever it is. I think also don't be frightened to look at other sectors. A lot of the move to online, to online delivery of lessons, people are reinventing the wheel. People are not kind of looking what's out there, and they feel that they need to just do everything within their own school or their own multi-academy trust or local authority. So try to just do a bit of kind of gazing around of what there is and bring some ideas, and then collaborate. You know, why do it on your own if there's a group of you that could do stuff together? So the school where I'm chair of governors, we're part of a little group of schools that work together. So all of the planning around risk we've tried to do together, because that speeds it up, shares it out, and brings up things that we didn't think about. Yeah. So the heads actually felt really nice and calm doing that rather than panic stations.
We've got time for perhaps one more question. I'm just going to jump to one that he has. His leaders should be formal or informal or a mix of both with team members.
Oh,
so that's
yeah.
always that tricky balance that you have.
Yes, and there's always that moment where you crack a joke or something and you think, I just totally overstepped. I can't answer that. I think you should be you. I think you should be watching and learning from people's leadership that resonates with you, and think about what are the things that resonate, and are those things that you have in you. So don't ever try and copy somebody or be someone you're not. I think keeping a professional distance is useful for your own self-protection and also for your direct reports who may need a break from you. I think don't be confused as well between what is formal and what is informal. So it is not informal to ask somebody, well, it's not formal or informal, but you should be asking somebody how they are, why that is, how's the family if they've got one. You know, you should be taking an interest in the whole person without making them feel probed and uncomfortable. But I don't know if you should go down the pub and get off your face with your colleagues. I don't think that's a good idea.
I think what underpins all of it is the fact, one, you're working in a professional environment. So there's you've got to work with these people on a professional level, and you've always got to think that some of the conversations may not always be positive that you have to have, and actually maintaining a boundary that it is a professional environment. Whether you're actually physically in school or not is still a professional environment, and there is certain limits to professional relationships.
You know? I think warmth, though, can span across formal and informal. I think compassionate, empathetic, you know, you can be empathetic and also draw boundaries. So you know somebody's having a terrible time at home, but you also will expect them to behave appropriately at work, and also ask to not be at work if they can't behave appropriately and they need support. So I think...
and definitely, and also... different levels of leadership as well. So as a head of department, you're literally day in, day out in the nitty gritty with your team, and the relationship may be very different to if you're line managing a department, or if you're further up in SLT, where your contact is at a different level in terms of time wise, that you don't have that nitty gritty day to day interaction with those people. Therefore, that mix may have to change depending on the level of interaction you have. I think definitely. I think we are into the end of our session, Penny.
Yeah, sounds like
we made it. We made it. Yay. I just want to thank you immensely, Penny, for the time that you put your presentation together. Love the cartoons, love Calvin. I'm going to have to hunt him down. I did see him this morning when I was hunting for some pictures myself, but I knew that you'd used him, so I chose not to. I just want to just thank you for all the work that you do and all the different platforms that you engage with. And I don't know how you find the time. I really don't. So thank you, Penny.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody who attended today. And yeah, thanks for the whole series. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, that's the end of another session, our first one of the week. And what a way to start the week with Penny Rabiger. Do find her online, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever you use, and make sure you engage in the conversations. This session is recorded and will be made available to you online tomorrow at the Chiltern Teaching School Alliance YouTube channel. Do find it. You will get an email with a link to that tomorrow morning. Do follow us on Twitter at Chiltern TSA, and Penny's been tweeting, and she's been on there. So if you have trouble finding her, which I don't think you will do, but you will find her LinkedIn with the hashtag LDeduchat hashtag. So this week we have coming up, tomorrow we have John Rees looking at personal, social, health education as a way to develop the cultures within schools and to improve your schools. And then on Wednesday we have Chris Nichols. For those of you that are local to the area, he was the head of the Luton Sixth Form, which was one of the largest in the UK, and does so much school improvement work over his years, and is also now using his expertise and developing coaching programs. On Friday we have Daniel Connor, head of Cholney High School for Boys, and Mark Mailer, who's the lead CPD, looking at how they embedded a reading culture within their school of boys. As I said to you earlier on, no mean feat at all. So this is me, Arv Cowshaw, signing off on another session of hashtag LDeduchat, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.